That's funny. She mentioned the 12 Traditions workshop because I probably broke every tradition prior to doing that. But my name is Rich. I'm an alcoholic. Great day to be sober. I woke up to another miracle this morning. The obsession to drink was gone. And maybe not for you, but for me, that's a miracle. Because there were many days, and I'm going to share that in my story, that I woke up looking for the first drink. I was told that when I shared my story, I was to talk a little bit about what it was like, what happened, and what's it like now. My story is no different than yours. There's not a lot of excitement in it. What I can share with you is my disease took me farther than I wanted to go. It kept me longer than I wanted to stay, and it cost me more than I wanted to pay. I started at a very young age. I always hear this age group, and when I listen to stories, it's around the age of 13. I don't know what it is about that age group, but, I think when I look back at that, I remember coming home from school and my mom grabbing this wooden spoon and going to hit me. And I grabbed her hand and I said, never again. And, and I'm not sure if that's where I went from God's will to self-will. But, I did get into good ass kicking when my dad got home. I can tell you that. I like to sit here and share with you that it was because the people we had moved from Joliet, Illinois to Waterloo, Iowa, and the first people I ran into were drinking and smoking and doing the things they were doing, and I just happened to be in that neighborhood, and that's what got me started. But that would be a lie, because my journey through this process, and I think you'll find that I'm just a garden variety drunk. What I can tell you, though, is I gave away everything I had so I could do one thing, and that was drink. And it wasn't into the final years of that. So, after, drinking without consequences through junior high and high school, I went off to college and started an illegal entrepreneurial business to get through college, which most kids do, selling things to get some side money, et cetera, like that, throwing keg parties, et cetera. I get out of college. I go back to home, which is Waterloo, Iowa, where my parents live. I get a job for a company called Metro PCS, which actually became MCI down the road, and installed some phone systems for John Deere's. And when that phone system was installed, I got laid off. But instead of seeking for another job, I just collected unemployment and lived at my parents' house. It was very cheap. There was no rent. They supplied all the food. So what I did is I gambled and went to bars. And that's what I did for a really long time. And eventually my dad came to me and said, you know what, this isn't going to work. You need to get out of here and do that. And so I love to tell you that I grew up in, a broken home or in a poverty level and all these things. But, I was a spoiled kid. My name is Rich Kid, and trying to live up to that was a little bit hard, right? But I can assure you this. I remember when it was time for me to leave home, my dad took me to a Chevy dealership, and he said, pick out a car, any car. And I picked up a Z28, brand new. He gave me $500, and he says, start heading south, looking for a job. So I went to Omaha. I went to Tulsa. I went to Oklahoma City, and I ended up in Dallas. So there was a girl I went to high school with. Her brother lived here. And the first job interview I went on, I got a job here. So I moved here in 1984. And coming to Texas from Waterloo, Iowa, was quite eye-opening. Not only was there a lot of people, there's a lot of beautiful women, a lot of nice bars, not taverns that sit on corners, And you buy one drink and you get two free. What is that? And they had happy hours that would feed me. The old days, of those of you around here remember Monopolies and Brio and In Cahoots. And, it was amazing. And fast forward on, I got married in 1991 to a woman that I met at Cowboys. Go figure. And I'm still married to this day, which is by no fault of my own, trust me. And went to work for a gentleman by the name of Dr. Wang and installed computer systems and engineered on them. And went on to another company called Multi-Wave Digital Solutions, which is a manufacturing rep company, which I became part owner of and was there for a really long time. and acquired some things through the way. I built my first house in Allen, Texas in 1992, my second one in 2004, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Fast forwarding, though, as my disease progressed, as it says in the big book, it is, it gets worse, never better. But what's amazing about this program is when I got here, I didn't know what I didn't know. And, after coming into the program, it says in the big book, in the doctor's opinion, that men and women drink essentially because they like the effect produced by alcohol. Even though they admit it is injurious, they cannot differentiate the true from the false. Their alcoholic life becomes the only normal one. So for a lot of years, living in Allen, I had a daughter, and things were good. The cars, the big house, the pools, all these things that everybody hopes for in life. But, the funny thing is I had this spiritual malady, which I didn't know. I had something in my soul that I was feeling because I didn't have a God of my understanding. And on my daughter's 18th birthday in Allen, Texas, it was me, my wife, her, and her boyfriend. We went out to dinner. And after dinner, I dropped them off. Of course, I had some drinks at dinner. After that, I went to a tavern. And that evening, on my daughter's 18th birthday, I picked up a DWI and a possession charge. And you would think that this would rock my world. But the following day, my daughter and my wife came to pick me up at the McKinney jail, and my daughter calls it the walk of shame. So if you've ever been there, that big long hallway you got to walk down. Everybody's looking at you, and they took me home. My wife ran and got me some Kentucky Fried Chicken for lunch. I jumped in the shower, and I took her car and went to the bar because mine was impounded. So, I needed a way to get there. And the funny thing about it is that didn't stop me from doing what I was doing. I didn't feel that I was hurting anybody. But later on, there's been people that had came to me and says, maybe you have a problem. And I'm like, well, I think the problem is that, not me, it's you, kind of a scenario. And I had actually resigned from a company that I owned part of, which only an alcoholic would do. And fast forward to that point, I spent the next 5 years living on the money that I had saved to enjoy my later years in life with. And so when I say I gave away everything I had to do one thing, I eventually lost the house, the cars, a relationship with my wife, a relationship with my daughter, to the point where this is where I get my qualification is that I'm 49 years old. I'm living in a rental property off of Hedgecox. My dad in Iowa is paying my rent. I got a pay-by-the-minute phone that they supplied because I didn't have any phones. My wife is living in one end of the house. I'm living in the other end of the house. I'm getting food from St. Jude's Church, but I think my life is normal. Now, I don't know about any of you, but to me, I'm like, oh, life's not that bad. Give or take, the electricity's on, all these things. And then out of the blue, back in 2011, I get a call from the gentleman who hired me that was the owner of the company that I worked for. And a lot of you know him. His name is Danny. And this is where it gets difficult. So my daughter was at the University of Alabama, and it wasn't because of anything that I did. It's because my dad co-signed a scholarship or a loan so my daughter could go to the University of Alabama. That's where she had to go, and I didn't have anything to do that, so my dad did that for me. And my daughter had reached out to Danny one day and said, my dad's dying, and I need your help. And Danny looked at her and talked to her, and he said, what do you want me to do? I mean, Rich is off doing what he's going to do. And I get this phone call from him, and he calls me and goes, hey, why don't we go grab a sandwich? And by this time, I'm driving around in my daughter's car because she's the only one that had a car. I'd given all mine away. And we're at the Subway shop, and he says, why don't we get your wife a sandwich? I'm like, dude, she's not even talking to me. We haven't been communicating. Life is not well on the home front. There's a lot of strife in the marriage. And so we get a sandwich, and we go back to this rental property where I was living. And we're in the garage, and then they pulled an intervention. So actually, the last time I told my story, my whole intervention team was here. They were sitting over there. It was my wife, my daughter, and Danny. And he said, here's the deal, Rich. He says, I'm willing to help. I'm willing to bring you back as an employee under certain circumstances. One is you clean up and get sober. And I had been at that point where I was going through this process of a beer in one hand and a gun in another hand, and contemplating how I was going to kill myself and take my own life. And that had been going on for some time. I just never acted on it. And I still, since why I'm here today. And so I said yes. My wife thought I said no and started beating the shit out of me. And Danny's like, stop. He said yes. But it's kind of ironic how that all happened in place. And I'll share that a little later in the story. But so I went to work for them. We were going to wait 60 days for the insurance company to kick in. So what I did as a good alcoholic, I started interviewing treatment centers, trying to find the treatment center that best suited me. And, I called one in Van Alstyne. I called one in Austin. And there was one in Princeton. It was called Karen Treatment Centers at the time. And my insurance company said I could go to any of them but Karen, which was in Princeton, which was right down the street. And so I'm like, all right. So we went ahead and started enrolling in this other place, but we had to wait 45 days. So I don't know what a good alcoholic does. I have 45 days to get under my belt what I need to do before I have to go into treatment. And so literally every night I was killing myself. And then I get this phone call from Karen that says, hey, we got one bed here dedicated to Collin County, and we're willing to give it to you for $5,000. And Danny cut the check. And I was in there the next day. So I remember the night before, I went out on an all-out bender, thinking, this is going to be my last night. We're going to go out with it, blazing guns and glory. And as my daughter's driving me to the treatment center, I'm finishing off my last beers. And she's pulling in the parking lot. What's funny, I remember this, is as you're pulling in the parking lot, they had this big, huge banner and this sign that says, if you want to drink, that's your problem. But if you want to stop drinking, that's our problem. And I'm like, whoa. And then you go on, and then it's this beautiful layout. It's on 67 acres. They got a gymnasium, a pool, all the things that you would think I would want. And she dropped me off, and then she said, enjoy that last beer. That's the last one you'll ever have. And I'm like, I was agreeable with that. So I check in. I go into detox. I wake up 3 days later, and this nurse, they're feeding me this Librium to keep me sedated or calm. And on the third day, I just said, I don't want any more of that medicine. It's making me drowsy. They go, Rich, you don't understand. That medicine's not for you. That medicine's for us because you're an asshole. So I don't know what I was doing the first 3 days I was there, but it wasn't kind, I guess. And so I finally woke up, and then what was funny about this journey, and it is a journey, is when I came to, and on day 7, it's funny how you take an alcoholic and you remove alcohol and drugs from him for 7 days. You give him a shower every day. You feed him 3 square meals every day. And guess what? I'm like feeling good. I'm feeling like I got my shit together here. I went to my counselor. His name was Will Alexander. I says, Will, man, I don't think I got a problem. I don't think I'm like these other people in here. I was looking at all the differences, not the similarities. And he said, Rich, let me assure you this. If I had $1 for every patient that came to me, and said that, I wouldn't be working here. And then at the end of our session, he says, I want you to do me one small favor. I want you to call your mother. I'm like, dude, I'm 49 years old. I don't need to drag my parents into this deal. And at day 10, I finally broke down, and I called my mom. And I said, hey, Mom, I just wanted to let you know that I'm in a treatment center. And the first words out of her mouth were, you should have went right out of high school. So what an amazing step that was. It says, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. So I went back to my room. And what I did is I wrote down all the consequences, trials, and tribulations that I had faced in life. And on the other side of that piece of paper, I could associate drinking and drugging with every one of them. Step 1, I conceded to my innermost self that I was an alcoholic. Right? The delusion that I could drink like another person had to be smashed, So that was my first beginning concession of step 1. But I can assure you, my journey inside the treatment center wasn't all rosy. I was actually put in 24-hour timeout when I was there. And because of later in the steps, and we'll talk about this, it was really self-will driven. And what I did is I would rearrange the furniture in the man area the way I wanted it. I would smoke cigarettes where I wanted to smoke cigarettes. I would go down to the lake and prey on this raft or this dock that they had, which was off limits. I did everything I wanted to do. And finally, the director of the facility came to me and she said, Rich, please understand this. You're a patient here. You don't own it. And instead of being apart from everybody else that was in there, I became a part of. And I started showing up to class on time, or whatever they want to call them, group sessions. And I started sharing openly that what was going on in my head, in my heart. Because I remember when the first step that they ever introduced to me was step 10. So we had this form that we had to fill out every night about what we did to hinder our recovery, what we did to best help our recovery. Was I mean to anybody? Was I kind to anybody? And I wrote those on the same shit every day. And Will says, Rich, he goes, you just put this on a copy machine and just print them out because all the same shit. And, I started putting some more thought processes into it, right? And I started sharing. And the funny thing about this treatment thing, when I look back on it, is I get to a place that wants to help me save my life, and I don't want to be there. And then after 30 days, they're like, okay, Rich, it's time for you to go. I'm like, no, dude, I'm staying for another 30 because I felt comfortable. They were telling me what to do, when to do it, and how to do it. And I got into that routine, and I was comfortable doing that routine. And I didn't want to go out of the world or out of this box because what I can assure you is all the problems that I had when I went into treatment were there when I got out of treatment. And I had warrants, and I had, a job that I just started. I had all these issues that I wanted to run from instead of face. And then Danny, who this is an amazing part about the story. So Danny, who did the intervention on me, had 19 years, 8 months, and 13 days and relapsed. And he 12-stepped me while he was drinking on that intervention with my wife. And he came out to the treatment center, which is the funniest thing. And he started sharing me, because what we did is we came to Odaat. We came on the drug buggy, right? Every day they would take us out to a meeting on the drug buggy, right? And I would rip my band off because I didn't want anybody to know when I came in here that I was coming from a treatment center, And Danny's sitting there talking to me about all these different meetings that he's gone to. Here I'd worked for Danny for 11 years, right? I'd totaled out multiple company cars, right? I'd been arrested as an employee or a part owner of the company with him. And I didn't know I just thought he just didn't drink. I didn't know he was in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. He started sharing me, so I go, okay, Danny, so when I get out, that means you're going to come with me to my first meeting? And he did. And he picked up a Desire chip. And he has over 10 and a half years now. Again. Which is an amazing story. And so I get out, and then let me go back a step. So I picked up a sponsor on 7/25 of 2011. His name is Jim Gardner, amazing man. Bless his heart. He had to put up with me, and he met me for my first meeting. I picked up my 30-day chip, and we met every Thursday until I got through the 12 steps. But what I can share with you about my journey in sobriety is there were a lot of bumps and bruises. There was a lot of pain. For this alcoholic, it got worse before it got better. You remove alcohol from Rich, and I become restless, irritable, and discontent. So I get out of treatment, I come home, and 2 days later, my wife's like, I've seen enough, I'm out of here. And she goes down to the in-laws for 10 days, which was a blessing, which actually was God doing for me what I couldn't do for myself. So my daughter had left the University of Alabama and came back here because she wanted to monitor her drunk dad to make sure he was staying on the wagon, and enrolled in Collin County. And she's the only one that had a car. So this is how it worked for the next 4 or 5 months is we would get up in the morning. I would take her to school. I would go to work. After lunch, I'd go pick her up at school, take her home, and go back to work. And what I realize now, looking back, is that was God giving me the opportunity to build a relationship with my daughter. Because I would leave. It's funny. She would text me more than you would know. I would, because I came here to Odaat. I'd come at the 6:30 a.m. is where I got sober. I'd come to the noon, and I'd come to the 6:30. So I did 3 meetings a day for the first 90 days, and I was batshit crazy. Literally batshit crazy. That's why this miracle of the obsession to be gone is so awesome, because there wasn't a day that went by early in sobriety that I didn't think about drinking all day and didn't take a drink. And I don't know what's worse, drinking against your own will or thinking about drinking and not drinking. They both were kicking my ass. And so me and Jim started working through these steps. But when I got out, I still had warrants. I still had civil court judgments against me. I still had a lot of financial ruins. I had all these things, all the problems that I created. It's like moving a freight train. So I'm pulling this train, and I quit drinking and I quit drugging, but the train keeps moving. And it's running me over on a daily basis. So I'm trying to build a relationship with a woman that I've been married to for, 19 years at the time. And with a daughter that was 19 years old. And we started down these steps of this journey. And, it says step 2, it says, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. When I came in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, I always believed I was a part of God's team. I just chose not to be a team player, right? I was going to wear my own jersey. I was going to hog the ball. And I was going to do it my way. Even though I was raised in the Catholic, environment, it's funny, I always share this story because Father Brunken, we used to go to confession every Wednesday. And I would share with him my sins that I'd committed. And he goes, Rich, that's the same shit you told me last week. And why that's funny is because I remember now my sponsor saying, if nothing changes, nothing changes. If you continue to do it, it's not old behavior. That's what Father Brunken was telling me when I was 13 years old, and what I didn't realize, what the program of Alcoholics Anonymous is about the relationship that I built with the God of my understanding. I could say all the prayers. I could, the altar boy. I did that whole gig. I went to church every day. We were in a parochial school. So, it's amazing that when you go into We Agnostics, it talks about, we became alcoholics crushed by a self-imposed crisis. We can either postpone or evade. We had to face the proposition that either God was everything or he's nothing. Either is or isn't. What's your choice to be? And, it was a hard decision for me. I wanted to believe if I kept sober and I kept be willing and honest and open-minded, that this program would work. Because the principle behind step 2 is hope. And my hope came from hearing other people's experiences. So when I'm coming in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous at 6:30 a.m., I'm sitting here in the corner where we're sharing this. Nobody wants to sit by me because I am a train wreck. And people are sharing how their lives are so good. I'm like, how is that possible? My life sucks. You know, at 4 months of sobriety, my wife came to me and she said, just go drink because I can't stand you sober. You know, and so we started on that journey. And then we come to step 3. You know, it says, made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him. And this is where I had a big problem. Because I was self-will run riot. So my sponsor says, you know, Rich, I'm going to dummy it down for you. He says, made a decision to turn your thinking and your actions over to care of God as you understood him. But I'm going to share with you one thing, Rich. Don't always believe what you're thinking and quit acting on your feelings. For every thought isn't the truth and every feeling isn't a fact. And if doing the right thing hurts, it means you're growing. I'm like, sobriety sucks, dude. Because everything hurt early in sobriety. It was hard to make the right decision. It just didn't come natural. I was a born lying, cheating thief. I was just had that natural characteristical traits. You know, so we started this process of, you know, getting up in the morning. And I heard this at another group. And what I'm sharing with you is just stuff that I'm regurgitating that I've heard through the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. A gentleman down at the Waxahachie group says, I woke up this morning and got to God before my brain got to me. You know, my goal in the morning is to get to God before my brain gets to me. Because when I wake up in the morning, I'm not sure what happens, but all I think about is me. You know, it's this process of walking through that problem. And so through step 3, which has had the biggest impact in my life and continues to have the biggest impact in my life, was a struggle. And I'll share with you just some of the reasons why I struggle with it. They're not reasons why I struggle with it. They're just reasons that I have a problem. It's Rich. I would get off work and I would go home. My daughter would be texting me, where you at? What are you doing? I mean, second 6:30 came around, 7:30 came around. I'm leaving the meeting. They wanted to monitor every move I was making. And I get home and I felt like my wife was attacking me. You know? And every day I walked in the house, I felt like she was attacking me. And my sponsor said, Rich, do you ever think that maybe your wife had a bad day and just needs to vent? Rich, did you ever think that maybe your wife doesn't want your opinion? Rich, have you ever thought about just shutting the fuck up? You know, and it was this process, because once I felt like I was being attacked, I engaged. And then it was war. And I don't know, it was around 5 or 6 months of sobriety. And I used to call him on the way home and get prepped. I mean, it was like a leverage that I had to be told what to do when I walked in the house. You know, I mean, I had to put post notes strategically in my life to remind me of things I needed to do, like get down on your knees and kneel, shut up and listen. You're not in control. I mean, I had to physically be reminded of that on a daily basis. And one day I walked in the house and she goes, hey, would you help me hang some blinds? And generally what Rich's comment would be is, can't you see I've worked all day? Can't we do it this weekend with the other 1,000 projects that I've never done? And I said, sure, let's hang them. And after I got done hanging them, she cooked me dinner. And I called my sponsor, I called him up, I go, hey, this shit's working. And what I learned through that process is, instead of expecting anything, maybe I should try giving something. Maybe on my way home, I call and ask her, Kathy, is there anything I can do, or is there anything I can pick up that you need? And the dynamics of that relationship started to change. It was the same thing with my daughter. It was the same thing with everybody. It was the same thing with people I met in public. It was the same thing everywhere. It says selfishness, self-centeredness, that we think is the root of our troubles, driven by 100 forms of fear, self-delusion, self-seeking, and self-pity. We step on our fellows, and they retaliate, seemingly without provocation. But invariably, we make a decision based on self that later places us in a position to be hurt. Every problem that I have had through life has been self-imposed. I have created it. I've learned that today. I talk about 3 buckets when I share a lot, because fear, my life was riddled with fear. The fear of not getting what I want, the fear of losing what I have, or the fear of the unknown. And those 3 things are apparent still in my life today. But as we go down farther in the book, He tells us that we have a new employer, being all powerful, that he provides what we need if we keep close to him and perform his work well. And established on that footing, we will lose the fear of today, tomorrow, and hereafter. We are reborn. This step, I worked longer than any other step. A lot of people say just making a decision to do the rest of the steps. My sponsor really had me focus on trying to accept others for who they are, on trying to give rather than receive, and I'm very grateful for that. Again, it still has the biggest impact in my life today. So we move on to step 4. And it says, made a fearless and thorough inventory of ourselves. Searching a fearless inventory. So, which is kind of an ironic thing because, I was pretty excited to do that in the beginning. Because there was a lot of people I thought that had wronged me. There are a lot of institutions I felt that didn't treat me the way I should have been treated. There were a lot of fears that I had. There are a lot of people I'd harmed in my sex conduct. And so as I'm writing this all down, I started noticing a pattern internally, which was kind of scary. But then after I'd finished that step 4, we did step 5. I did my step 5 at the IHOP in Allen, Texas on 75. So a lot of things in Allen, Texas are close to me over a Rudy Tooty fresh and fruity breakfast. And this is where the game of ping pong began. So as I'm walking through my resentments, I'm sharing why I was upset, or the institutions I was upset with, the principles that my dad had said, like champagne tastes on a beer budget, under my roof, under my rules, all these things started coming to light when we got to column number 4. And this is where the ping pong match began, because I'm like, I'm walking through these and I go, well, Jim, I don't think I really played a part in that. And he'd volley the ball back to me. He goes, yes, you did. And I'm arguing with him back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, until he could share his experience, strength, and hope, and I could become willing and open-minded to admit that there was a part that I played in it. And that's what's amazing about step 6, right? It says in step 6 that we admitted these things we find objectionable, meaning it's things that in us that we can't see, but you can see in me. I had to admit those things. And we walked through each and every one of those until I had a good understanding on what part I played in it. And then what part I played in it was different for each of those things. But most of it was because I was selfish and self-centered, right? I wanted what I wanted when I wanted it. And I want you taking anything that I had. So we finished this step 5 in the IHOP, and I walk outside and we hug each other, and I'm smoking a cigarette over by my daughter's. Well, I think by that time I might have had my first car. I can assure you that my first truck, which had like a 23% interest rate on the loan. That's how great my credit was. It was ridiculous. And I'm looking over across the highway 75, and I see this huge cross. And that cross is from St. Jude's Church that I was getting my food from. And so in step 6, it says we go to a place and we get quiet for an hour and review the first 5 proposals, making sure we didn't skip on anything, making sure that we could objectively admit that, these were things that I had to fix in me. These were defects that I had. So I went over to St. Jude's Church. I don't know why. And I walked in that church, nobody in there, just me. I had my 4 steps spread across the pew, my big book out. I'm saying the 7-step prayer, my Creator, I'm not willing you should have all of me, good and bad, which I love. And I'm focusing, I hear this little pitter-patter, pitter-patter, pitter-patter. And I look up, and there's this little nun about 4 foot tall. And she's like, sir, what are you doing? I'm like, I'm in recovery. And I'm doing part of the process that I've been told to do in recovery. And she says, well, here's the deal. I'll go into chapel and I'll say a prayer for you. I'm like, golden, yes. What more could I ask for? So after I'd sat there for an hour or so, I went into chapel. And how ironic. It was a Wednesday, and guess what they do on Wednesdays? Confession. Don't ask me why, but I get in line, and I walk back there. So Father Brunken was face-to-face. This one had a curtain between us. Thank the Lord. So I get in there, and I said, bless me, Father, I've sinned. It's been 25, 30 years since my last confession. And I shared with him just few of the things that mainly were based around harm to my wife. You know, I wasn't always the best husband. I wasn't always the best father. I wasn't always the best employee. But I shared those things with my sponsor, but it didn't really change the deep feeling I had in my heart. So when I started sharing this with this guy, and I don't know, we were in there about 5 minutes, and he interrupted me. He says, you know, it sounds like we need to set up an appointment. I'm like, nah, I think it's time for me to get some penance, and it's time for me to go. So I got my penance. I went out in the chapel. I did my penance, and then I lit a candle, and I walked away from there. Did I feel better? Yeah, a little bit. Did I feel great? No. But what I can share with you that is so important is that was the last time that I can remember having the desire to drink. It was lifted. In the big book it says this, at step 5, the feeling of the drink problem will be removed, will come strongly. And since then, I have not woke up with the desire to drink ever again. Since then. So the big book is amazing in that way. So it said, made a list of people he'd harm, became willing to make amends to them all. Or made a list of person we harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. So we start making this amends. You know, my wife, my daughter, the employer, you know, they were easy. You know, I mean, the struggles I had were the financial amends, personally in my life. You know, as a good alcoholic, I didn't file taxes for 5 years prior to coming into Rooms Alcoholics Anonymous. Because I'm like, you know, they took my house, they took my car, screw them, screw the government. You know, but you know what? That don't work, trust me. The civil court judgments I had, so name a credit card company. They wanted something to do with me. And I used to come in here at 6:30 a.m. and I'd hear gentlemen, people that I know in the program for a lot of years that talked about how they had the same problem. And through working through this process and facing their fears one day at a time and just calling these people and sharing with them that, hey, you're willing to make this right, but there are certain conditions that I can do only because I don't have all this amount of money to just pay you back. I started whittling this back a little by slow, one day at a time. It took me 8.5 years in sobriety to pay off my financial debt. I got a letter from the IRS that says, we no longer own you. My wife's like, what do you want me to do with that? I go, frame it. I mean, it was probably the biggest moment of my life. I mean, you know, they no longer owned me. I had paid off all the debt, all my 8.5 years. You know, it's, I didn't get to make an amends to my parents for 4.5 years because they lived in Iowa and I lived here. But I remember when I shared that, my amends with my mom and my dad, and it was an amazing thing. You know, because they loved me for who I was. Good, bad, or indifferent. You know, that's what parents do. I mean, my dad paid my rent. I mean, at 49 years old. And, you know, all the things he did for me, you know, I can never pay back. There were some amends that I did have to make to other people that there was only one that wanted nothing to do with me. And I twice I attempted to make amends to this gentleman, and it was, he denied me both times. I called my sponsor and says, let it go. You made the effort, bury it, let's go, move on. You know, and so then we, through that amends process, we go into step 10. It says, you know, that we continue to take personal inventory, and we were wrong, promptly admitted it. I love this step. It's a daily inventory. It says it's easy to rest on the program of action and rest on our laurels. For alcoholics as a subtle foe, what we really have is a daily reprieve contingent on the maintenance of our spiritual condition. It also says that our next function is to grow in understanding and effectiveness, for this is not an overnight matter. It must be continued for a lifetime. I must continue to look for dishonesty, resentment, and fear. When these arise, I ask God to remove them. I place a phone call. I apologize or make restitution to anybody I'd harmed. And then I resolutely turn to others that I can help. That is my go-to today. It's funny as I heard this in the rooms is, I go to bed a spiritual giant today and I wake up agnostic. I have to start this program over every morning. I get up in the morning and it leads me kind of into step 11 is sought through prayer and meditation to continue to prove my conscious contact with God as I understand Him. I get up and I say, God, thank you for another day sober. I ask for your grace, blessings, mercy, and strength as I walk through this day, that you guide my thoughts, my words, and my actions. Relieve me of the bondage of self. Show me who I need to help today. Of thy power, thy love, and thy way of life. And then I have some other things that I say in that, but that's generally it. And I was going to share this one thing that my dad shared with me. So my dad was a huge spiritual giant. And when I was back there making my amends, I asked him, I says, I was sharing with him what my prayer life looked like. And he goes, Rich, I don't do a lot of praying these days. I do a lot of listening. I'm like, son of a bitch. He's not even one of us. He gets it. You know what I mean? And then I just sit there in quietness. And I have a routine that I go through. And, and how I got into this routine was by nothing I did. It's something that came on to us all, right? And the pandemic has created a routine that has changed the way I look at things in the morning. And then we go on to the last step is having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps. We try to carry this message to alcoholics and to practice these principles in all our affairs. When I was 45 days sober, the director of Karen called me and said, you know what, we're thinking about starting an alumni program. Would you be interested in maybe running it? And I was like, nope. I spent 31 days there. I have no interest at all, Ann. And I called my sponsor. I go, can you believe the audacity of this woman? Asking me to come back and work with them. And she's like, you call her right now and you tell her that that's God doing for you, but you can't do for yourself. And I started doing that. And I went out with my sponsor. We started carrying that message. And I'm not doing it anymore today, which is another side note, but I've carried that message out there over 800 times in the last 10 years. But when I started getting comfortable there, he's like, all right, now we're going to jails. I'm like, no, dude, I've already spent enough time in that jail. I don't need to go back, and now I carry a message to jails. But the most amazing thing is about this program is the ability to work with others. It says, that in the big book that nothing more ensures immunity than intensive work with other alcoholics. It works when all other things fail. I've had the opportunity to sponsor a lot of gentlemen in the program Alcoholics Anonymous. I've actually even had the opportunity to bury a sponsee. But what I realize, it takes all of us. It takes some of us to do it the right way, some of us to do it the wrong way, and some have to die. But it's the fellowship, and in the book it shares that I know I must get along without liquor, but have you a sufficient substitute? Yes, there is a substitute, and it's vastly more than that. It is in the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. There you will find release from care, boredom, and worry. Here's the ticket. Your imagination will be fired. Thank God. The best years of your life lie ahead. That's where you find the fellowship, so will you. And then it goes on to talk about to watch others recover. To watch loneliness vanish. These are the gifts of the program today. Is when I see somebody in a treatment center come out, work the 12 steps, and become a person that I can't even identify with. If you don't believe in the miracles of Alcoholics Anonymous, you're not going to meetings because, I see people in the rooms Alcoholics Anonymous that should be dead that are alive. I see people in the rooms Alcoholics Anonymous that should be in prison that are free. I see people in Alcoholics Anonymous that are giving instead of receiving. Things that were always difficult for me to do in life. And for that, I'm truly grateful. If it wasn't for each and every one of you the 12 steps and the principles of Alcoholics Anonymous and the God of my understanding, I wouldn't be here today. And back to I gave away everything I had to get one thing. I gave up one thing, and I've been giving back everything. That's all I have. Thanks.